The Sustainable Voice, bringing you big successes from small places worldwide.
Welcome back to the Sustainable Voice. This is Ashish, and I've got a great buddy, James, on the call today. One of the smartest people I know. James, welcome to the Sustainable Voice.
Good to see you again, Ashish. I think we only live 30 minutes apart, but we don't see each other enough.
No, seriously, it takes a global podcast for us to actually get together. Okay, I can't wait. We got a really cool conversation today because we're talking about the balance between tourism and local communities, and we're talking about everything from water consumption to energy consumption. And you're the right person to talk about this because of your background as a guide in South Africa, plus the fact that you're the host of an amazing TV show as well. So we'll jump into that. But before we do, for all of our listeners, make sure you hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit that bell notification. You know I got to do it. I'm a pro at this now. So, James, first of all, last time I saw you, we were flying back to from Morocco together. And then the time before that, we were flying back from Vegas together. And it seems like every time I see you, you're sleeping.
True story. Yeah, lots of time zones.
Yeah, every time I see you, you're either in a car or an airplane. I mean, we can make our own planes, trains, automobiles movie, and of me driving and you sleeping, or me sitting up and you sleeping. Like that's it. But it's there. But I have to tell you, a really cool story. I don't know if I ever told you this. First time I met you, you had come into our office, and I remember you had come in with a mutual friend, and we're taking the mickey out of her the whole time. And I remember I sat down just going, this guy just seems so familial. He seems like he's just like it was like I was meeting a long lost brother. It was like I was meeting somebody I haven't seen. And then, we've done different events together. We've given different talks together. We were in Kansas City together. We were down in Fort Lauderdale together. So our paths have crossed over and over and over again. And how we didn't have you on the show before this is mind-boggling because you're such an expert in so many different things.
No, thank you. Well, I'm glad I made it on your B list.
Not quite B, maybe C.
Maybe C. Yeah, let's be honest.
Yeah. A high C though. A high C. A solid high C.
I'll take that any day. It sounds like my high school results.
Yeah, exactly. Look, I put you just a shade below Steven Seagal. I mean, you're right there. Yeah, I mean that's a solid C. It's okay, man. I mean you're above politicians, so don't worry. I got you above politicians. So
I love that.
So there's that. And you've also been the person I've gone to because a lot of our listeners I've talked about the fact I have solar panels on my house. I operate solar power. You're the guy that actually got me into solar power. You're the guy that told me who to call, what to do, how to install it, what to look at, what kind of system to put in. You're the guy that guided me the whole way. And now, I mean, especially right now, my last energy bill was basically nil thanks to you, which was fantastic. I'm actually selling power back to the power company thanks to you, which is quite nice.
So, yeah, those were the good old days when we got tax rebates for stuff like that.
All gone. I mean, something needs to change so I can get more panels put on or something. So, all right, let's jump into this because this leads into what we're talking about. So, water scarcity, energy scarcity, it's not a future risk. We're here. I mean, you and I were both born in Africa, grew up in different parts of Africa. We faced energy crisis from power outages to load sharing to droughts to whatnot. We've been a part of this. We've lived it in different forms. So let's jump into this, right? You were a field guide. Before you were a TV show, you were a field guide in South Africa, and you were a brand ambassador, you were a conservation communicator. Let's talk about that. Can you share some of your background with the audience because every time when I heard it, I was blown away.
Yeah, sure. So Ashish, I started in sort of the mid-1990s as a safari guide in a beautiful place in northeastern South Africa, just close to the border of Mozambique, a place called Pinda Private Game Reserve. And I worked there as a guide for a number of years. And then I got really interested while I was a guide in not only the wildlife, but how intrinsically connected the community is to the wildlife and the land and the tourism and everything that happens in Africa. And previously in Africa, as you know, communities were excluded from the whole conservation process. Right. So the more I got to head out into local communities and go stay with some of our staff members in some of the villages, I got really interested in the community aspect. And then I left guiding and went to run a nonprofit in Africa called Africa Foundation. which deals with connecting communities to wildlife areas in Africa. And that became a great passion of mine. So, everything from, ensuring that communities have access to clean water, to good education, to skills for starting new businesses. That's all the kind of stuff that we used to do through Africa Foundation. And then after that, I worked for various companies and then got into wildlife television, specifically birds at first with National Geographic and my own TV show, which was called Nikon's Birding Adventures. And that has now morphed into another TV show, which is called A Wild Connection, also still sponsored by Nikon. And I now work for Great Plains Conservation, which is an incredible organization which facilitates luxury high-end tourism in Africa with a premise to expanding green frontiers across the continent and taking care of communities and wildlife at the same time.
Do you know, when we first met, I was telling you that I think our paths might have crossed when you were at Pinda. I think I was mentioned at some point. I was obviously much younger, but our paths might have crossed.
More than likely, if you were with a very good, handsome, good-looking guide, it was probably me.
I definitely was, but it wasn't you. He didn't walk with a limp. He was all right. No, I'm just kidding. You know what? I have to tell you, I have met the most amazing guides through. I mean, being from the continent and then going to all these countries, I've met the most amazing guides. You and I have a mutual friend that used to be a guide, and he was, one arm and whatnot, his little terrier dog that he was in Namibia. But then there's all sorts of other guides that you and I have known together in different places. But I've always admired all of the work, especially when you were a field guide, when you were in the foundation. And then, of course, I've actually seen you on TV as well. But you and I have given talks together. And I'll never forget one of the conversations. We gave a talk together on Rwanda. And we were giving a speech together, and you said something that I'll never forget. You said, tourism isn't supposed to be here. It was never supposed to be here. And you're talking about Rwanda. My wife's family was pushed out by Idi Amin from Uganda. So when somebody says something like that, you start listening, going, yeah, this person understands. And we started talking about that. And then another talk, we were talking about the big tuskers. You had done a whole episode, a documentary on the big tuskers in Tanzania and the last great big tuskers, the last of the big tuskers, and where they were. So you've been all over. What's the craziest story from the field that you can share? I mean, I know you can't tell us. You might have to kill us if you tell us. But is there a crazy one?
I don't want to. Ashish, I don't want to scare people into not going to Africa.
Oh, no. Don't worry. I'll take care of that myself. Don't worry.
My job is to get people to come to travel to Africa. Yeah. But a quick story that happened to me many years ago. This was going back 25, 26 years now. I was in the Caprivi Strip area, which is just north of Botswana. It's now part of Namibia. It's a very remote, very kind of hostile environment. But I was leading a birding trip there. And long story short, we went to a place called Mahango Game Reserve, which is fantastic for birding. I had an elderly British birder in the car with me, and we went out looking for wattled cranes. And I told him to stay in the car, and I went down and looked for the cranes. And all the cranes, I saw them. There were like 40 or 50 of them in this beautiful flock. And he really wanted to see these birds. He'd seen a lot of birds in Africa, and this was the species he wanted to see. And their whole flock took off and disappeared into the horizon. And I was like, oh, no, this is terrible. And I started making my way back to the car. But then as I was making my way back to the car, I'd looked to see if there's maybe just one or two cranes left. And there were none. And this big black-maned African lion was walking straight towards me. And I was absolutely terrified, of course. And he was kind of vocalizing a little bit. And so I started moving back, and we had this cat and mouse kind of scenario for a little while. Every time I stopped, he stopped. Every time I moved, he moved forward. And as I was walking back, I looked behind me as a guide does, always keeping my eye on the lion, but also looking behind me so I don't get stuck in a tree or fall in a ditch or something. And I noticed that on the path behind me, where I just walked 5 minutes earlier, were fresh tracks of more lions, lionesses to be precise. So I got trapped between a male lion and lionesses with cubs in Mahango Game Reserve, and basically had no rifle, had nothing, and had to shout down these lions as they charged me every single time for minutes on end. And I eventually made it back to the car, and the last charge was right at the car. And I remember opening the driver's seat door and sitting in the car and then looking at my my guest Harold, and his eyes were as big as saucers. And the only thing he said to me in this clipped British accent was, "Oh, James, the things we do for birds." And I thought, where's the we in this, Harold? Where's the we in this? So yeah, as guides, we've had some pretty crazy experiences, but Africa is safe. When you go on safari and
Yeah.
you're on a safari vehicle, it's just an incredible experience. It's just us guides tend to be a little bit rogue sometimes, and especially when I was birding.
Knowing you as I do, and if we were together, you would have probably fed me and taken off. I mean, I would do the same thing. I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. I'm
Yeah,
just
yeah.
kidding. It is. It is. We're both from the continent, which is why we can talk about this. I've talked on end about being stung by a scorpion as I was climbing up to the gorillas in Uganda on my first trek, and nothing quite like sitting there looking at gorillas while you've got your foot swelling up, not knowing what kind of scorpion just stung you. Whether it was the small clear one, the big black one, going, all right, am I going to lose my foot or am I going to have a fever? Which
Right.
one? Which one's it going to be?
It's like 50-50.
50-50. Yeah.
I'll take those odds.
Throw a camera lens in the air and see which way it lands. That depends on whether or not you're going to have a foot or not. But
Exactly.
you know what? These stories, as you know, and I get it. People who've never been, like, might say, "Oh my gosh, no, I'm not." No, come on. This is not the norm, right? I mean, when you're with somebody who's had these kinds of experiences, like with James, for example, or somebody like James, your experience becomes so much better because you will be one of the best people to understand the animal behavior more than somebody who's just guiding every day. You will have an experience that allows you to see what the behavior is going to be, what should be done. You're more responsible about it with clients because you know where the limits are, you know where the lines are. And not often that doesn't happen very there are times, rare, but there are times where newer guides maybe are still learning that. And that actually then blends into this idea of energy consumption, right? Of this energy conflict or water conflict. When you were working as a field guide, were there ever any cases, and I'm sure there were, but where there was a shortage of water, be it by drought or whatever means, and where there just seemed to be the balance was out of whack in terms of the needs and what was there? Have you ever experienced something like that anywhere on your travels?
Yeah, look, I mean, not specifically while I was guiding at any camps. In fact, we had the reverse in some areas. We had massive floods at certain times of the year. And, I think Africa is definitely a continent of contrasts like that. It's either a time of plenty with lots of rain and even devastating floods, and then it's times of drought. So yeah, I mean, look, a number of years back, we had a complete crisis specifically in Cape Town in South Africa and other parts of South Africa, where basically the entire city of Cape Town, one of the largest cities in Africa, actually ran out of water pretty much. And
I remember this.
People were having to come into hotels and bath in a bucket or like have a sort of bucket shower. People in their houses were extremely limited as to how much water they could use per day. But it was very difficult because from the tourism perspective, they wanted guests to be happy. So they'd put a bucket in your shower and say, please try to conserve the water so we can reuse this water later. But it wasn't like a prerequisite. So while the locals kind of suffered, the tourism industry largely carried on unaffected. And if you look at water consumption in Africa, for example, the average guest in a hotel will use on average about 8 to 10 times more than a community member per night. So there's this big disparity between taking care of the economic benefits of tourism for a country versus then putting all these restrictions on local people who are really struggling with water consumption and water usage. So yeah, it does happen at a big level across Africa. And it's also important to remember that, at certain times of the year, you might have, just like we've had now very recently, amazing rains in places like Botswana and Southern Africa, Kruger, I mean, to the point of it flooding. But then other places up north in Kenya, severe droughts. So Africa should not be looked at in isolation. Africa is huge. It's got more countries than any other continent on our planet. And just because it's raining in Botswana doesn't mean that it's raining in Kenya.
How do you reconcile that between, the needs of, where's the balance? You and I are part of some of the same sustainability organizations, conservation organizations, whether it's global or regional. And this conversation's come up, right? I mean, we did, on a past episode, we had talked about an experience I had in Colombia, this is right after the pandemic. During the pandemic, actually, there were a bunch of islands off the coast of Cartagena, Isla Fuerte, a couple of the ones there. It takes 2 days to get there. The gentleman I was working with there through our foundation, through his family, we got access to the entire naval armada of the country. So we're able to use naval destroyers to take 85, 90, 100,000 liters of water out to some of these places. These are islands surrounded by water. And what we noticed in these islands is that there was plenty of water, but no desalination plants, no reverse osmosis systems, no way to actually turn that into potable water. I remember one particular story my colleague was telling me that his name is Abraham, that he's a listener, by the way. He's like my younger brother. He had gone there with all this water, with all this food, rather, delivering food because some of these islands, martial law had taken over. So he had gone there with food. And a couple of the community members came up and said, we will trade you all of our food, lobsters, fish, whatever it was, for clean water. And they were on an island. So when you hear that, and then listening to your story in Cape Town, because I remember that period as well, how do you reconcile that? Where's the balance between the tourism needs and community needs for water? And should there be a balance? And what does that balance look like?
Yeah, that's a great thing. And I think if I just go back to what you said about clean water just quickly to educate our audience here, is that, it's a misconception that we have less water on our planet today than we did 100 years, 1,000 years, 1,000,000 years ago. In fact, if we go back right to prehistoric times, there's roughly the same amount of water on our planet today as there was millions of years ago. It's basically 70% of the Earth's surface. The problem is only 1% of that 70% is actually drinkable water.
That's right.
And less than 1% of that 1% is above ground drinkable water. The rest is all in aquifers below the earth. So fresh drinkable water is very rare. And yes, there's a huge balance there between how do you get the balance right between having a thriving tourism sector and then taking care of local communities who are actually competing for that same water source at the end of the day. And I think it's incumbent on all those hotels and those operators to do really sustainable practices. In other words, don't water their gardens with sprinklers, for example. It might be more labor intensive, but water and water places, lot less waste on water if you do that. Obviously, we all know about towels and laundry and how much that impacts everything. But there are a number of things that you can do as well in a sustainable organization is first of all, the big one here is get away from plastic bottles and that kind of drinking water. It is so wasteful. When you're shipping in water, the energy costs of shipping in those plastic bottles and that water, rather use reverse osmosis systems in hotels and luxury safari lodges. It might be expensive to set up initially, but in the long term, it actually saves those hotels money at the end of the day as well. And at the same time, being less of a drain on the overall water that's available in that particular region, whether it's drinking water or not. And then also remember, you're getting rid of plastic as well, which is a huge issue. For example, in our camps, we don't have any plastic bottles whatsoever. Everything is done through amazing reverse osmosis, and that water tastes better than any Evian water you can ever drink out of a bottle. I'll promise you that. So it's about that. It's a mixture of, I don't think you've got to keep that tourism industry thriving because that in turn creates jobs for local people. But you have to make sure that you're choosing a hotel when you travel that demonstrates sustainability and really good conservation practices when it comes to water and energy use.
There's the owners of your camps, of the faces, the Jouberts, were teachers since I was a teenager, people I've looked up to since I was my late father knew them. You, by the way, James, so those of you know, James also knew my late father very closely. So that was there. But these are all very solid points. And actually, if coming back to the plastic, just yesterday, I was having a conversation with a head of sustainability for a large organization. And I know that word sustainability is overused, but it does apply here. Remove the plastic for a second. There was something that I was showing him in particular about the fact that when you look at bottled water, it is not always pure bottled water. There is all sorts of chemicals in that water, which if you are drinking that water and let's say you don't finish it, that water gets poured out into a plant or poured into the ground surface, all those chemicals are now starting to affect the actual water table. They're now contaminating the aquifer. I remember just going back to Colombia, we had gone to this place called Caño Cristales with the Rainbow River, where the algae is luminescent and everything else. It's the cleanest water in the country, the cleanest water in South America. And this particular place, we went there, we were very clearly told that if you're going to get in the water, you cannot wear sunscreen, you cannot wear any kind of insect repellent, nothing. After you get out of the water, put whatever you want on. But before that point, you got to be covered up, this, that, whatever the case. You cannot put any of it on because you cannot contaminate this water stream. When we look, what I was talking about was that if you remove, yes, the plastic side of it, but let's say, because that whole notion of plastic free is becoming so political now. You and I both know the reasons why single-use plastics are an issue. And a lot of people do, but it's become so politicized that all of a sudden it's, no, that's not the case. Okay, remove that from the equation. The actual chemical content in water. If you don't believe me, what's that water bottle that Coca-Cola has? Whatever it starts with a D.
Dasani?
Thank you, Dasani. Look at the content. If you don't believe me, out of our listeners, if you don't believe me, just pull up a bottle of Dasani. I'm not knocking Coca-Cola Corporation. To their lawyers, I like you very much. Please don't sue me. But honestly, it's not just them. Whether it's Dasani, whether it's any other one, just look at the ingredients. It's not just crystal water or mountain spring water. There are ingredients in there, and they're put in there. See if you know what they are. Look up what those ingredients are, and then see if you'd like to have that put into your watering table. I agree with you because we actually put a soft water and osmosis system in our house, right? And a lot of camps, like your camps, have ability to catch rainwater as well. And that drought part, you and I have both faced it head on. I faced it in central Kenya in the Rift Valley. There was a particular area near Lake Magadi, and the lake had dried up completely because of a severe drought. 3 things happened because of this drought, and this is beyond the community, right? So first, yes, obviously there was not enough water in the community, and just as you said, the camps was still bringing in water from Nairobi, so there was an imbalance. The second thing that was happening was that the flamingos, the way they migrate, you've seen how they migrate to Lake Latron, that entire movement was off-kilt. Completely had been affected by this. They were not moving the way they're supposed to. The third thing that happened was the communities that were there, women in particular, because of the lack of water, they had to shut down schools. Because they had to shut down schools, women in particular, especially teen girls, were not able to get sanitary equipment, sanitary hygiene, because they were getting them at school. They had no means to get them in their communities. The only chance they get them was at schools. If the schools closing because of lack of water, and then there's actually one more that happened in this particular school, was that wildlife conflict. 2 hyenas had actually come into the camp, killed one of the teachers, killed 2 of the kids, looking for water in that school, in the campus. Thankfully, the kids were not all there, but there were enough there where the hyenas did reach them. That's not supposed to happen. So as you said, you have plentiful water, you have drought water, but you've said something very key that our listeners should remember. Anytime you hear anybody, whether it's a politician or somebody who just likes to hear the sound of their own voice, talking about, there's a lack of water in the world. No, there isn't. As you said, no, there isn't. There's a lack of potable water. That's the difference. And that's the thing. And so we're talking about visibility versus volume, right? The volume is there. The visibility and the clairvoyance of that water is where the clarity of that water is what's missing. Right? The clarity of the water.
100%.
Right.
And we have to, there's so many things that you can do at a lodge or a hotel level, or even in your own house to mitigate this. Like, for example, in lodges, when you look at wastewater, where does that water go? You've got this precious resource. 1% of all the water on earth is drinkable. How do you make sure that 1% stays a 1% and doesn't degrade? Wastewater is huge. You've got people showering, and you've obviously got your lavatories in hotels and lodges. where does that wastewater go? How is it treated? And how does it affect the water table? So in places like Botswana, for example, in very fragile ecosystems like the Okavango Delta, you cannot have below ground septic tanks with seepage areas, because although it takes most of the stuff out, it's going to filter into the pristine waterways of the Okavango Delta. You just can't have that. So we've had to have above ground STPs, which are sewage treatment plants at our camps in places like Botswana, all above ground where everything's taken off site and you're not affecting that water table at all. The other thing you look at, which a lot of hotels do, is swimming pools, and one swimming pool per room. I mean, the water evaporation from swimming pools is huge. So as a company, we do them. So we have private plunge pools, but we have them in places where the water resource is not critical. Places like the Okavango Delta, where it floods every single year. But then you go to Kenya, we have the same level of camp. We don't have a plunge pool in every room because you have to truck in that water, and it's a huge waste of resources that local communities could be using and wildlife could be using.
This actually leads to a really good point about shared water systems. What you're talking, understanding evaporation, understanding how water tables work, understanding how, as you said, how to keep that 1% the 1%. That's where that's the shared water system. That's the shared fate, right? That's probably where the balance is. What are some tips that somebody could do in their own home to keep that 1% the 1%? If you were advising your neighbor on how to keep that 1% the 1%, what are some of the things that they could do in their own?
Yeah, there's so many easy things you can do, Ashish. Some of them more expensive than others, but some of them very easy. For example, so when you're brushing your teeth, just fill a little cup with water, dip your toothbrush in it, brush your teeth, rinse your mouth out with the water in that cup, versus keeping the tap on and just running it and letting it flow. Another great thing to do is just, if you shower, as most people do, versus bathing, have a little bucket in the bottom of your shower and use that water that you've been showering with to water your garden or to water your pot plants in your house. There's so many little things you can do. At a more sort of expensive level, I guess, is you could put up rainwater tanks with your guttering system in your house, and you'll be surprised how much water will flow from your gutters into these rainwater tanks. And that rainwater, depending on where you get it, you don't want to drink acid rain.
No, not a good thing.
But water from the sky is delicious. It's got this neutral pH. It's really delicious, very healthy water. Rainwater tanks are amazing. You'll be surprised how much water you can get from that. And then just being really cognizant of your water use when you're doing everyday activities around the house. And watering a garden, big one here. It takes longer, but a watering can to water your garden versus putting on sprinklers where water just gets wasted all the time. There's a lot that we can do in our own homes to conserve water.
What are your views on wells for irrigation, water wells for irrigation? What are your views on those?
Yeah, look, again, I think it doesn't really matter where that water source comes from traditionally. It's all, as we've just discussed on this thing, part of that 1%. Whether it comes from city water or whether it comes from well water. I live in an area in Florida here where I don't do any of my irrigation with city water at all, just because it's expensive. And that's one of the main things. But I have a pump that takes water from my canal, and then I use it sustainably to water my garden. And that water, you don't need to purify it, comes straight out of there. In fact, it's probably even better because it's got nutrients in it. So it's better for the lawn and better for the plants. So I don't know. I think well water would be a little bit different in that, you've got that ground level water, which is a kind of finite resource. If you have wells everywhere and you're irrigating gardens from wells everywhere, that is going to make an impact over time.
Right.
Unless you have good rain.
And the sediment that comes up as well. Yeah, 100%.
Exactly.
Well, so I have measured even the smallest grass. Let's say you have a little, 5 foot by 5 foot lawn in the front, nothing in the back. Let's say in New York, you are still using at least 15,000 gallons of water every time you water your lawn. Every time from the city. And you're right, it's expensive. A watering bill. I hear people here in Florida where where you and I both live, people are, my water bill was, $300, $400. And you're like, how is it that high? Are you taking 5 showers a day? And then you're like, oh no, but I water my grass every other day for 3 hours and whatnot. And then you're like, okay, is it reclaimed water from the canal? Is it okay? Even if it's well water, is it this? Are you on the grid? No, I'm on the grid. There you go. That's part of the
Yeah.
problem. So there's also something to be said here about the fact that, as you said, the way systems work, whether it's rain systems, rain catchers, whether it's there's also some of the camps that use some form of natural algae to turn that water into irrigation water to do different things as well. But I want to tell you the story about this gentleman in Colombia. I keep going back to it, but this gentleman, he's got my attention. So his project is our new foundation. We just signed him on as our new project for our foundation this year. It's a project called Via Cortina in Medellin. He's a finance guy from Canada, and he moved with his daughter to Medellin and built this community kitchen where he's actually teaching the locals who are they're having a hard time. He's not teaching them, oh, come here, I'll feed you. He's showing them using hydroponics, drip irrigation systems, how to grow their own food, how to actually make their own food. And so he took me to the rooftop. This is just back in October. Took me to the rooftop of his house, basically. He stays there as well. Plus the restaurants at the bottom, the kitchens at the bottom. And he has this amazing I guess you call it garbage disposal or an incinerator, but it's not an incinerator. He blends up all of his waste food. Right. So whatever he's eating, doesn't matter what it is, whatever organic waste it is, he blends it all up. He pours it into this compactor. Then I watched this compactor, and I have the video to show it. It's incredible because I was doing it there as he's showing me. And then he basically turns on the compactor. It takes every ounce of liquid out of that organic waste, every ounce of water, and separates it into a little canal that he fills up with a watering canteen. Right. And then the rest of it becomes dry organic waste that becomes fertilizer. And then he's using that water to water his plants. And he said that the water he gets out of here, because it's filled with the natural nutrients that are going back into the ground, it is the cleanest water that he's putting back into his garden. More than even if he was using soft water, filtered water, distilled water, whatever it may be. He said this water, the key part of this is the nutrients that made these plants grow are now going back into the ground, and the same nutrients are going to come back up. And he's developed it's basically osmosis through compacting. And the way he described it to me, he said, just picture a sponge. Picture a sponge. You wash your dishes and you squeeze the sponge, squeeze, 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 squeeze. And now instead of that water going down the drain, you're just collecting all that water. There's no soap in the sponge. You're just collecting all that water until the sponge gets completely dry. Then the sponge can be reused or done whatever with. But this particular one, bone dry, all the water that's squeezed out, that's now the water I'm putting back into the garden.
Yeah, no, it's incredible. And, Ashish, I think you mentioned what can we do in our homes and everything. There's a lot that we can do, but there's also a lot that can be done at a governmental or state level as well. And the big thing here is, yes, protecting what we've got. So protecting those freshwater ponds, protecting estuaries, protecting all these areas that provide critical habitat for birds and other wildlife. And this goes for almost any country in the world. But let's not also forget about where certain water sources come from. So, for example, Botswana, where we have a lot of camps, the Okavango Delta is one of the natural wonders of the world. It's a pristine water aquatic ecosystem that sustains probably one of the largest densities of large wildlife anywhere on our planet. And yet that water doesn't come from Botswana. That water comes from the highlands of Angola every year. And if that water is not protected at the source in a country like Angola, and it gets polluted as it comes further down from those mountains and eventually makes its way to Botswana, it's going to severely impact the entire population of wildlife and the entire ecosystems down there, as well as the tourism industry on which Botswana depends. So there needs to be a lot of collaboration cross governments in places like Africa, where water sources and big rivers flow from one area to another. You've got to protect the source of those big rivers and make sure that they are kept clean all the way, because they don't just affect the country where the source is, they affect a lot of countries down the flow.
This is spot on. And this is, you're talking about governance now, and you're talking about how tourism actually can hold governments accountable to keep these. So this is interesting, because one of your camps that I've been to in the Salinda Spillway, one of the things I'll never forget about those camps is the lions. And they are adapted to the water. They don't behave like lions in East Africa. You and I have grown up with lions in East Africa. These lions in that part of Botswana, in that spillway, they're not part of the Savuti Elephant Channel. They're not part of the main channel in northern Botswana. They're their own spillway. It's their own ecosystem. Their behavior cannot be explained, but they are living through the water. And I was blown away when I stayed at one of your camps, specifically when I was watching this. It was incredible. I think those lions are bigger than the ones in Kenya too, right? If I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, they definitely have. I mean, that's the same species of lion. It just
Yeah.
means that they've adapted to hunting in aquatic environments. So at places like Duba and Zarafa as well, where there's lots of standing water year round, these lions they're bigger. They've got bigger shoulders, bigger chests, because they're hunting lechwe and other water liking antelope, and often during the day, funnily enough. So they change their habits as well. Most lions hunt at night, but we find that a lot of our camps in Botswana, the lions are actually hunting predominantly during the day. And that's because they can chase that prey into the water, corner them, and they're so big bodied that once they get them trapped in there, they can generally pick them off and get an easy meal.
Did I ever tell you how I got into tourism, where I started? Did I ever tell you the
No.
story? You'll appreciate this. So I was working in finance, had a successful career in finance, and I had no aspirations whatsoever to be in tourism. No, I was the one who went to his father and said, "This is all yours. I don't want this." I was designing automobiles, and I was 14. I was going into college, double majoring in mechanical engineering and finance. I wanted to design cars and figure out how to how to make them cost effective and profitable and whatnot, all this stuff. Anyway, 2000, the terrorist attacks happened. And I was basically reevaluating my choices in life at this point. I've been gone for 6 years. My mother called and says, "You've been gone for 6 years. You're working all day, all night. We don't see you ever. It's time to start looking at your life." So then I was like, I don't know. My father called me. He goes, "Look, just come to India with me." I've been a million times. He goes, "Just come with me. I know you've been a million times. Just come with me. I know you don't have any intention to come in tourism, but I just want you to come with me." Now, at this point, what I hadn't told him was I worked for an organization that had $1 trillion in the bank, right? So we had gotten that celebration. We had $1 trillion in assets. So money clearly wasn't a problem. And this was back in the turn of the millennium, right? So this is before the Elon Musk age, where it's trillions thrown around like it's nothing. So I go here, and I'm in Ranthambore National Park, and I meet this gentleman. His name was Fateh Singh Rathore. He was met him through somewhere, and this man changed my life. Right? He was 5'7". He looked like a cross between Theodore Roosevelt and Indiana Jones. He had a big camera, belt buckle, handlebar mustache, you name it. Right? I mean, he played the part. So I start talking to him, and he starts talking about this photography video he's taking. And as we're doing this, I start telling him about this footage, and this related to water. And I said I was in one of these reserves, and this is when tiger tourism was just starting to take off in India. It was just the very infancy of it, right, within the major reserves. And I'd watched this documentary in that very particular reserve we were in of a tiger that had made a kill. A crocodile had come out and taken the kill. The tiger had gone into the water after the crocodile, adapting how its hunting styles and come back up with its prey. Obviously not normal, but as you said, as you were talking about the lions in Botswana, adapted. Turns out he was a BBC videographer when that footage was taken. He was the one who took that footage, and he showed me all the B-roll footage that didn't make the air. And he started showing me all this, and he said, "This is what you didn't see. This is how long it took." He was camped out there for 4 months. He was taking videos, and then he goes, "The central source of that behavioral shift, much like the lions of Botswana, was the water. And not just the water, but the quality of that water, the pH balance of that water, the natural nutrients in that water, the natural ecosystem of wildlife, and the balance of wildlife, prey, predator in that water, everything from the microorganisms to the bacteria to everything that you'd expect it to be." He said if even 1% is off in that balance, the entire system collapses.
Yeah.
And I thought,
I mean, that makes 100% sense. We in our filming that we've done over the years with A Wild Connection, we recently did a show on the wolves of Yellowstone right here in the United States. And, it's incredible how like you say, you take one thing out of the ecosystem, just like wolves, super predators, you take them out of the ecosystem and everything collapses, from the rivers to the elk to everything that's out there. It just all collapses because you're taking one component out of it. And that's what's so important, is I think a lot of people don't realize, okay, sure, species have been going extinct for a long time, and it's only been accelerated by people over especially the last 300-400 years. We've lost so many species because of us that haven't occurred naturally. And when you add all that up together and you're taking all these components out of ecosystems, it has a devastating effect on not just sad to lose that one particular species, but the crash that it can cause on an entire ecosystem. And yes, ecosystems can be resilient. They take time to recover, but you'll need something else to fulfill the place of that thing that's been lost.
100%.
And I think that's what a lot of people don't understand.
And it gets politicized, right? I mean, we were talking about the governance, for example. Here we're talking about, for example, interdependence of water and tourism operations, energy, water. One of the past episodes we talked about, it was titled Water, Water Everywhere. We talked about, just what we were saying earlier, the fact that there is lots of water everywhere, but not the means to make it potable. It exists. The means to make it potable exists, but the political means to actually create that ability is a separate discussion. So I was part of a think tank that was talking about lithium mining in Chile and talking specifically in the Atacama Desert and the fact that this is quickly becoming the new form of slavery, in essence, of labor manipulation and whatnot. And as we're talking about this, there was a stat that was thrown out there. It takes 1 million liters of water to mine 1 ton of lithium. It's insane. Yeah. It's insane.
It's crazy when you think about that.
Here we're talking about, okay, well, and of course, lithium is used for electric cars, batteries, whatnot. If we're, as you said, if we're talking about the protection of the 1%, the policies that are written by those government organizations have to have as much of a say or have to be interdependent with the needs of tourism and communities. They have to all work in concert. As Fateh Sanghrajka said, if even 1% is off, the whole system collapses. There has to be a balance. So a government policy that's written on pure water conservation has to be one that makes sense. In order to make sense, the politicians, the leaders that are actually writing these laws and writing these policies have to actually understand the problem. And as you said, most of them don't.
Yeah.
Most of them think we're talking about water conservation. This isn't a water conservation problem. This is a water usability problem. This is a interdependence between 3 separate entities: governance, communities, and tourism. It's an interdependence problem, a balance problem. It's not a conservation problem. It's not a how do we conserve. Yes, we want to conserve water. As you said earlier, spot on. This is not about creating more water. This is about keeping that 1% to 1%, even increasing it to 1.1, 1.2%. The problem isn't the lack of water unless there's severe drought, which is not, that's Mother Nature. The problem is not the lack of water for the most part. The problem is the lack of usable water, right? Is that pretty much what you're saying?
100%. And of that usable water, how much of that usable water is polluted as well? That's critical because if you look at what are the main uses of water caused by man or humankind, should I say, 70% of it is agriculture. So 70% of all water usage on Earth is agriculture.
And this dates back to ancient civilizations. This is not a new concept. This goes back to Sumeria.
It's not a new concept. But right now, as we stand right now, 70% of our water uses of that potable water is agriculture. Yeah. And then agriculture, obviously, you're using all this water, but then you're creating runoff. Where does that water go? It creates phosphates and flows into pristine water environments that people need for drinking. So we have to really look at the impacts of agriculture. We have to look at the impacts of water sources close to urban environments, heavily built up environments where waste and runoff from, if it rains in a highly densely populated city, for example, and you've got a river next to it, all that runoff is coming off the streets, the sewage, the wastewater, everything is going straight into that pristine water source. So we really have to, at a governmental level, look at preserving those water sources going forward, because it is just 1% and it's less than 1% when you look at what you can actually drink of that 1%.
Right. So, okay, if you were in the room and had the ability to impact policy decisions, what's one thing, if you could say one thing to the most powerful leaders in the world that are responsible for the decisions being made by the globe? Let's say there's a central entity that decided on water consumption, an IMF for water, let's just say, for example, right? What's one thing you would tell them about responsible planning? What's one suggestion you would give them?
Yeah, sure. It depends on which country and which part of the world you're in, to be honest, because it's so different. The needs would vary from country to country. If we're looking like right now where we are in Florida, Ashish, the main issue here would be ensuring that runoff is controlled into our river systems here.
From the
Because it's
farms for the
100%
fertilizer and the farms. Yeah.
from sugar farming and sugar cane and everything else that happens so rampantly in South Florida, which is one of the biggest agricultural areas in the United States. I mean, you've got to make sure that that runoff is controlled. So that would be a Florida example. If you go somewhere else, it might be completely different. It might be a sewage issue when you get to Africa and you're looking at highly populated African cities like Nairobi and basically some of the slums and low-income housing areas that don't have good sanitation and sewage systems. Where's that runoff going?
This is an issue in Kibera. This is a massive issue in Kibera.
So the priority is going to vary from country to country. But the important thing here, I think, is that if you can get that top thing in every country in the world sorted out, I think we'll pretty much solve the water crisis in the world. Just that one top thing. If you take it globally and you do that one thing, if every government could do that one thing, would go a long way to solving the water crisis across the world.
And I would add to that, because I think you're spot on. It's understanding that it's not a one size fits all. There is a different part of it. I would add to that, because I think you're spot on, to say, get closer to the problem. In the case of Nairobi, for example, all the diplomatic missions, the embassies, they're all in the area of Gigiri. And you know Nairobi. Gigiri is higher elevation. You don't face the same problems there that you do in Kibera. You don't face those same problems there that you do in parts of Westlands. You don't face those same problems there that you do on the road to Mombasa. That doesn't exist. Or the road to Naivasha, for example, it doesn't exist. What happens in Eldoret doesn't affect Gigiri. What happens in Kisumu doesn't affect Eldoret. Same thing in South Africa, right? What happens in Cape Town doesn't have the same effect on Clanwilliam. Right? What happens in Johannesburg doesn't have the same effect on Drakensberg, right? It's a very different experience. And much like in South America, lithium mining and the water consumption in Atacama is a very different problem than the actual needs of potable water in the islands around the Caribbean coast of Colombia. So I would take what you're saying, echo it, and I would say, and because I'm privileged that we do have a couple of policymakers listening to our podcast, especially with the last one going so viral about protesting. So that there are ones that are listening. We're not the enemy. We're trying to help. And if we're in the room, we're simply telling you two things. One, it's not one problem. You can't write a centralized policy for water situations that are very different and energy situations that are very different in different parts of the world. And two, get closer to the problem. That doesn't mean go visit for an afternoon. That means go and listen to your constituents. Go into the slums. Listen to your constituents. Go listen to what they're saying. Listen to the problem. And then not only that, spend a night there. Actually experience it for one night and see for yourself what's happening, and bring a scientist with you. Bring a marine biologist with you. Have them tell you themselves. Bring somebody there with you in terms of it. So it would make the system less complex, right? If I had to ask you in closing, one question destinations should be asking right now, not a one-all. Let's take Botswana. What is one question that Botswana's policymakers should be asking right now about water and energy and the balance between that and tourism? What's one question or one point they should be asking that they're not talking about?
Sure. I think I touched on it a little bit earlier. I think the critical thing for Botswana to be doing right now is to be reaching out to the government of Angola and figuring out jointly how they can protect the water source of one of the most beautiful water systems on our planet, which is the Okavango Delta. Coming and doing something, and it's difficult because remember that, if you look at Botswana, they reap all the benefits of the Okavango Delta, but the water doesn't come from the Okavango Delta. And yet all the millions of dollars that flow in every year from tourism sits in Botswana. It doesn't sit in Angola. So there should be some concerted effort to make it worthwhile for the people in Angola to preserve that water source. Maybe it's a financial shared agreement on the tourism, or maybe it's incumbent on us in the tourism industry to look at opening up tourism in a country like Angola, which desperately needs it, around the Okavango River and the water sources that come down into Botswana, and developing some sort of tourism enterprise there. But governments need to talk, especially where you've got these water sources that are moving between countries across Africa.
Well, I remember a conversation with Derek and Beverly before you guys opened up in Zimbabwe, in Zambezi National Park. You were the first ones in there in terms of on the conservation side. There were other properties, but not like yours, not with the concerted effort. And it's everything you said. We're bringing foreign investment into Zimbabwe, this was the post Mugabe era in Zimbabwe. There was a desperate need for foreign investment because the social services were all falling apart. There was a desperate need. Victoria Falls was getting all the attention, and then everything else was falling apart around it. And I remember this conversation. It was pretty much what you just said, that the governments need to speak to each other. And that at that point, Zimbabwe didn't really have a fully functional government, but the local municipalities around Zambezi National Park were fine. And it was some of the principles that I admired, some of the principles you guys brought into the water systems around Zambezi National Park they're being copied today in other parts of Zimbabwe, but you are the pioneers. And I think that's the other part of it as well. What you're saying, right, is that if governments should talk, if Angola is the source of the water, then it's almost like there needs to be a conversation to have it, make it worth their while. How do we make it interesting for you? The same way when your organization was looking at entering into Zambezi National Park and coming into Zimbabwe, but not building around the falls, building something in a completely different area. There was that effort of how do we bring you along with us, right? And something I'll add to it is what you said earlier about the money staying in Botswana. Your organization is one of the few organizations, there's a couple more like yours, that keeps the money in Botswana. There are so many others where the camps are foreign owned and the money does not stay in the country. It goes back to Europe, South Africa, wherever. It goes back to a centralized corporate headquarter, hedge fund, public company, whatever, you name it. But I think that's the other part of what you're saying as well, is that if you're going to make these policies, that also starts with making sure that the profits stay in the country you're operating in, so it's worthwhile for the policymakers to actually see the benefits of tourism.
Yeah, that's 100% correct. Governments in Africa have started to realize this and are starting to clamp down on this, which is really good because economic leakage, as you say, can devastate a country. It really can. Nobody wants to see an organization from a corporate organization from outside a country going. It's like the early days of colonialism. Right. Going in there and taking everything that you can get and taking it out of the country to go back home to the country where you domicile. And that's not the right way to do business. It's not ethical at all.
We drew this correlation in Chile, and we've done an episode about Chile, the fact that Chile is quickly becoming the spare parts bin for foreign organizations, right? The Atacama and the Patagonia is now being divided up between Australia, private entities in Australia, private entities in Costa Rica, private entities in the US, hedge funds. It's being divvied up to the point where there is a massive, massive disconnect between the local communities and tourism, where local communities are shunned from their own community if they take a job, communicated from their community if they take a job in tourism. Tourism is seen as conquerors, and it's just the wrong dynamic completely. And it's because the conversations that you are talking about having are not happening at all. And if governments in Africa are starting to clamp down, in all these different countries in Africa are starting to clamp down, and especially in the continent, which has more countries than any other continent, they're starting to clamp down, and they're doing it. It's starting to be in some form of concert, whether it's regional or continental. It's starting to become in concert. That needs to translate to other areas. And what I see is that the countries in Africa that for some reason are still seen as, oh, look, poor them, the starving children, this, that, are now some of the decisions that are being made in some of these countries are starting to become examples of what needs to be followed by other countries, specifically in parts of South America where the system is out of balance and where it needs to be brought back into balance. So you're seeing a paradigm shift between teacher and student.
100%.
Yeah. James, this was so much fun.
Well, I just got to give you one tip, Ashish. I think, if you want to do your bit for water conservation tonight, when you have that Scotch whiskey, just don't mix it with water. Okay. No. Just drink it neat. Just drink it neat.
Yeah. You know what? You still remember that. You made fun of me for so long for putting water in my Scotch. Don't worry. I put my big boy pants on. I have it neat now. Don't worry.
I love it.
I have the bottle of smoked whiskey at home waiting for you, by the way. So next time I see you, no ice, brother. He'll be neat.
No ice, no water. I
That's
love
it.
it. Great talking to you, Ashish, today.
Likewise. Thanks again. And don't forget, guys, if you like what you heard here, hit that subscribe button, hit that like button, hit that bell notification. And don't forget to check out James's show. Absolutely good. James, you would just give a few words about your TV show where people can find you.
Yeah, sure. You can look at it online. It's awildconnection.com, awildconnection.com, and on Instagram and Facebook.
Fantastic. I urge you guys to check it out. I've actually watched his documentaries on the tuskers. I've watched his documentary on birding. Some of his stuff, you learn an amazing amount. This is one of the smartest people I know. I've known him for some time, and I'm just happy like we were able to get you on the show. You're a busy guy. It's hard to get you nailed down for something like this. You're always on the move.
It's an absolute pleasure, Ashish. We'll see each other soon. Thanks so much.
For sure. Talk soon.
Okay, cheers. Bye.
Thank you for listening to The Sustainable Voice. If you have a success story of your own, please reach out and share it with us. We'd love to hear from you. See you next time.